Welcome to today's deep dive. Um, Usually when we talk about a massive number, something like a billion, there is this natural human expectation to just abstract it.
Right, yeah. Like astronomy.
Exactly like astronomy. You hear that a particular star is a billion light years away, and your brain just kind of uh, files it under the category of really, really big,
Yeah.
and you move on with your day.
It's comforting in a way, right? We like things that are too large to comprehend to just stay out there in the abstract distance.
Yeah, totally. But then you step into the world of human population. And specifically, you look at the demographics of a nation like India. Suddenly, that abstract number is breathing.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is a great way to put it.
Right. We're no longer looking at a distant star. We're looking at a numerical landscape that is the literal engine of human
It
existence.
really is. It is the absolute definition of a living, shifting data set. I mean, every single digit inside that billion represents a life.
A literal human life.
Yeah, a consumer, a creator, a pressure point on local infrastructure, and a contributor to a massive cultural mechanism. When you strip away the abstraction, you are left with the profound reality of human scale.
And that reality is exactly what we are exploring today. We are going to examine a foundational geographical text that breaks down India's population. But we aren't just going to skim it.
No, definitely not. We need the details.
Right. So to really grasp the weight of these concepts, we're going to look closely at the exact language the researchers use. I'll be reading the original text verbatim, and together we are going to pull apart the mechanics beneath the statistics.
It is a remarkable document to analyze, too, because it forces you to understand how geography and humanity are, like, completely inseparable.
Yeah.
It takes academic language and translates it into the physical reality of how a billion people actually live, move, and survive.
And the reason you, listening right now, should care about this goes far beyond just knowing some large numbers.
Ab-
Understanding population dynamics is about understanding the socioeconomic engine of our entire planet. It dictates how resources are allocated, how cities either thrive or buckle under pressure, and what the future looks like for an enormous percentage of the human race.
So, where do the authors start?
Let's look at how they set the stage. Here is the opening paragraph of our source document. I'll read the first bit here. Can you imagine a world without human beings? Who would have utilized the resources and created social and cultural environment? The people are important to develop the economy and the society. The people make and use resources and are themselves resources with varying quality.
And then it gets into some really specific physical examples, right?
Yeah, exactly. It continues. Coal is but a piece of rock until people were able to invent technology to obtain it and make it resource. Natural events like a flood or a tsunami becomes a disaster only when they affect a crowded village or a town.
That phrasing is so powerful.
Let me just finish the last part of this section. It says, hence, population is the pivotal element in social studies. It is the point of reference from which all other elements are observed and from which they derive significance and meaning. Resources, calamities, and disasters are all meaningful only in relation to human beings. Their numbers, distribution, growth, and characteristics or qualities provide the basic background for understanding and appreciating all aspects of the environment.
What a striking way to open a text on geography and demographics. I mean, it completely upends the traditional view that the Earth is the main character and humans are just, living on it.
Yeah, it argues the exact opposite. The word that really stands out to me there is pivotal.
Right.
The text states that population is the pivotal element in social studies. And like in mechanical terms, a pivot is the central pin that a much larger mechanism rotates around. If you pull that pin out, the gears disconnect, and the machine has no function. The authors are arguing that geography, economics, and history don't actually exist in a vacuum. They only have meaning because humans act as that central pin.
That is a very precise way to look at it. Without the observer, the data doesn't matter. And the text proves this by redefining two concepts we usually think of as purely natural resources and calamities.
Calamities meaning like massive disasters.
Exactly. Take the example they use coal. During the Carboniferous period, hundreds of millions of years ago, there were massive forests dying, getting compressed, and turning into coal. But to a dinosaur walking over it, that coal had zero intrinsic value.
Right, it was just dense dirt to them.
Yeah, it requires human alchemy to change it. The rock itself does nothing until human ingenuity, our technology, our need for fuel steps into the equation. It is the human mind that transforms a useless black rock into a resource.
You can apply that same logic to everything around you right now. Like if you look at the device you're using to listen to this deep dive, It is ultimately just a piece of silica glass and some rare earth metals pulled from the ground.
Literally just rocks and sand.
Exactly. Without a massive, interconnected human population to extract, refine, program, and assemble those materials, it is just shiny dirt. We provide the value.
And the text applies that exact same anthropocentric logic to the negative side of the spectrum, to calamities and
Oh,
disasters.
right, the tsunami example.
Yeah. A massive tectonic shift under the ocean that displaces millions of gallons of water is just a transfer of kinetic energy. It is weather, it is geology in motion.
Just physics doing its thing.
Right. If that wave crashes onto a completely barren, uninhabited coastline, it is just a natural event. It only crosses the threshold into being a disaster or a calamity when human beings have built a village on that shoreline. We provide the context for the tragedy.
So humanity is the lens through which the entire planet is measured. And if we are the lens, we really need to understand the sheer size and shape of that lens, which brings us to the raw numbers of India's population.
Let's hear the numbers.
Let's look at the next section of the text to see how they quantify this. It says, human beings are producers and consumers of Earth's resources. Therefore, it is important to know how many people are there in a country, where do they live, how and why their numbers are increasing, and what are their characteristics. The Census of India provides us with information regarding the population of our country.
Which leads right into the massive data points.
Right. Let me read the actual stats they provide. India's population size and distribution by numbers. India's population as on March 2011 stood at 12,210.6 million, which account for more than 17% of the world's population. These 1.21 billion people are unevenly distributed over our country's vast area of 3.28 million square kilometers, which accounts for 2.4% of the world's area.
Let me just stop you there for a second. The contrast presented in those first few statistics is staggering when you actually map it out in your mind.
Oh, completely.
We are looking at a 2011 figure of 1,210.6 million, or 1.21 billion people. That represents 17% of the entire human species, but they reside on only 2.4% of the world's land area.
To visualize that disparity, imagine you are organizing a global dinner party with 100 guests, and you have 100 chairs that represent all the livable land on Earth.
Okay, I can picture that.
If you wanted to recreate the geographical reality of India, you would have to ask 17 of those guests to squeeze themselves onto just 2.5 chairs.
Wow, 2.5 chairs for 17 people.
It fundamentally changes how a society organizes itself. When land is at that kind of premium, every square kilometer must be utilized with intense efficiency.
And the complexity deepens because, as the text emphasizes, that population is wildly unevenly distributed even within those borders.
Yeah, the text gets into the specific states here. It says, the 2011 census data reveal that Uttar Pradesh, with a population size of 199 million, is the most populous state of India. Uttar Pradesh accounts for about 16% of the country's population.
Wait, 199 million in just one state?
Yes, and then it compares that to the other extremes. It reads, on the other hand, the Himalayan state of Sikkim has a population of just about 0.6 million, and Lakshadweep has only 64,429 people.
That is just an incredible disparity. You have Uttar Pradesh holding 16% of the nation's entire population. If Uttar Pradesh were its own sovereign nation, it would be among the top 10 most populous countries on Earth.
And the researchers deliberately juxtapose that massive concentration with the extremes on the other end, like Sikkim and Lakshadweep. It is a brilliant way to illustrate that you cannot treat a country of this size as a monolith. You have incredible density right alongside vast emptiness.
This unevenness leads to what demographers might call the heavy center of gravity.
Yeah, the big five. Let me read that part. Almost half of India's population lives in just 5 states. These are Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, Bihar, West Bengal, and Andhra Pradesh. Rajasthan, the biggest state in terms of area, has only 5.5% of the total population of India.
Half the population in 5 states. That's wild.
I find the mention of Rajasthan at the end of that section particularly revealing. Rajasthan is physically the largest state in India by landmass. It takes up a massive portion of the map, yet it holds only 5.5% of the population.
The geographical giant of the country is comparatively hollow when it comes to human settlement.
Exactly, which prompts a really obvious question, right?
Right.
What could be the reason for the uneven distribution of population in India? Why are human beings packing themselves shoulder to shoulder in Uttar Pradesh while avoiding the vast open spaces of Rajasthan?
We definitely need to explore the mechanics of that uneven distribution.
We will in just a moment, but before we can ask why the numbers are what they are, We have to understand how we actually know them in the first place. Counting 1 billion people who are unevenly distributed across mountains, plains, and islands is a logistical mountain to climb.
Oh, absolutely. It's a massive undertaking.
The text outlines the tool used to achieve this in a brief sidebar. Let me read it. Census. A census is an official enumeration of population done periodically. In India, the first census was held in the year 1872. The first complete census, however, was taken in the year 1881. Since then, censuses have been held regularly every 10th year. The Indian census is the most comprehensive source of demographic, social, and economic data. Have you ever seen a census report? Check in your library if it has one.
That phrase, official enumeration, carries so much weight.
Yeah, enumeration basically means counting things one by one, right?
Exactly. Enumeration isn't an algorithm making a high probability guess based on satellite imagery of nighttime city lights or mobile phone usage. It is the methodical, painstaking process of counting distinct human lives one by one.
And doing that across the subcontinent starting in the late 19th century is almost difficult to wrap your head around. The text notes the first attempt was in 1872, but the first complete one was in 1881.
Think about the infrastructure or lack thereof in 1881. You don't have digital databases. You don't have motorized transport across much of the terrain.
You have enumerators traveling by foot, by cart, across deserts and up into the Himalayas, meticulously recording data by hand.
And it isn't merely a head count. The text specifies it is the most comprehensive source of demographic, social, and economic data.
So demographic meaning like statistical data about the population itself.
Right. Demography is the statistical study of human populations. A true comprehensive census captures age, gender, occupation, literacy, and housing conditions. It is the ultimate diagnostic tool for a government. You cannot build adequate hospitals, schools, or transportation networks if you don't have a high-resolution photograph of who lives where and what they need.
If you have ever filled out a census form, it can feel like a bit of bureaucratic paperwork.
Yeah.
But when you look at it through this historical and geographical lens, participating in a census is an act of making yourself visible to the societal engine.
That's a great perspective. You are providing the data points that determine the trajectory of your region for the next decade.
Which brings us back to the question of where all those data points are clustered. Raw population numbers don't tell the whole story of how crowded a place feels or how strained its resources are. For that, you need a different metric.
Right, which the text introduces next. Density.
Yes, let's look at how they define population density and answer that lingering question about why some states are packed and others are empty. The text says, population density provides a better picture of the uneven distribution. Population density is calculated as the number of persons per unit area. India is one of the most densely populated countries of the world. The population density of India in the year 2011 was 382 persons per square kilometers.
This is a crucial pivot in demographic analysis. The text explicitly states that density provides a better picture than raw numbers.
Because it adds spatial context.
Exactly. If I tell you that 100 people are standing in a room, you don't actually know if they are comfortable or suffocating until I tell you the size of the room. Density provides the dimensions of the room.
The unit of measurement here is the square kilometer. Imagine taking a giant piece of chalk and drawing a box on the ground that is 1 kilometer long on every side. The population density is simply how many human beings are standing inside that box.
And the national average in 2011 was 382 people inside that box.
But just like the raw numbers, the average completely masks the local extremes. The text continues. Densities vary from 1,102 persons per square kilometers in Bihar to only 17 persons per square kilometers in Arunachal Pradesh. A study of the figure 6.3 shows the pattern of uneven distribution of population densities at the state level.
Look at those two states. In Bihar, you have 11,102 people squeezed into that single square kilometer box. That is an incredibly intense concentration of human activity.
Yeah, people living, working, farming, and traveling in very close quarters.
But if you pick up that exact same 1 kilometer box and drop it in Arunachal Pradesh, you will only find 17 people inside it. You drop from over 1,000 down to 17.
This radical difference doesn't happen by accident. Human beings are biological organisms, and like any organism, we settle and multiply where the environment supports our biology. The authors include an activities section right after this that perfectly explains the geographical mechanics behind this unevenness. Let me read that.
Go for it.
It says, activity. Note the states with population densities below 250 persons per square kilometers. Rugged terrain and unfavorable climatic conditions are primarily responsible for sparse population in these areas. Which states have density below 250 persons per square kilometers? Assam and most of the peninsular states have moderate population densities. Hilly, dissected and rocky nature of the terrain, moderate to low rainfall, shallow and less fertile soils have influenced population densities in these areas. The northern plains in Kerala and the south have high to very high population densities because of the flat plains with fertile soils and abundant rainfall. Identify the 3 states of the northern plains with high population densities. Here we see the physical environment acting as the ultimate filter for human settlement. The text categorizes density into 3 tiers and links each tier directly to the physical geography. Let's start with the sparse areas densities below 250 people per square kilometer, like our example of Arunachal Pradesh or the vast expanse of Rajasthan. The text points to rugged terrain and unfavorable climatic conditions.
This is foundational survival stuff. If you are dealing with the freezing temperatures and sheer cliffs of the Himalayas, or the extreme heat and arid dunes of the Thar Desert in Rajasthan, agriculture is brutally difficult.
Building roads is an engineering nightmare.
Right. The land simply cannot support a high concentration of humans. Its carrying capacity is low.
Then you move to the moderate tier, places like Assam and the peninsular states. The text lists a very specific set of geographic traits: hilly, dissected and rocky nature of the terrain, moderate to low rainfall, shallow and less fertile soils.
I think dissected is an interesting word choice there. It paints a picture of land that is chopped up by rivers, ravines, and elevation changes.
Yeah, it isn't completely hostile to human life like a high-altitude glacier, but it presents constant friction. The soils are shallow, meaning you can grow some crops, but you aren't going to produce the massive, sweeping agricultural surpluses needed to feed a megacity, so the population remains moderate.
Which leaves the final tier, the areas of high to very high density, like the northern plains in Kerala. The geographic formula here is the exact opposite of the sparse regions.
The text highlights flat plains with fertile soils and abundant rainfall. If you are looking to build a civilization, that is the jackpot.
It really is.
It's essentially the macro version of looking for a place to set up a campsite for a picnic. You don't pitch your tent on a jagged, wind-blown cliff, and you don't pitch it in a barren sandbox. You look for a flat, comfortable clearing right next to a steady stream of water.
That's a perfect analogy. On a civilizational scale, flat plains mean you can build sprawling infrastructure easily. Fertile soils combined with abundant, predictable rainfall mean you can grow astronomical amounts of food.
And throughout human history, wherever there is an abundance of food, population density skyrockets. The geography creates the density.
But density is just a snapshot of a single moment in time. Geography determines where people settle initially, but populations do not remain static. They are constantly shifting, growing, and reacting to new pressures.
That brings us into the mathematics of how these numbers evolve. The text moves from a static snapshot to a moving picture. Let's read the section on population growth and see how they calculate this momentum.
Okay.
Population growth and processes of population change. Population is a dynamic phenomenon. The numbers, distribution, and composition of the population are constantly changing. This is the influence of the interaction of the 3 processes, namely births, deaths, and migrations.
The vocabulary choice right in the beginning is vital. The text calls population a dynamic phenomenon.
Dynamic meaning constantly changing, right?
Yes. A census might give you a rigid set of numbers every 10 years, but the actual population is highly energetic. It is constantly churning, affected by biology, economics, and environment.
And to measure that churn, the authors make a very careful distinction between 2 metrics that are often confused: absolute numbers and the annual growth rate. Let me read how they explain it.
Please do.
Population growth. Growth of population refers to the change in the number of inhabitants of a country territory during a specific period of time, say during the last 10 years. Such a change can be expressed in 2 ways: in terms of absolute numbers and in terms of percentage change per year. 2% per annum means that in a given year, there was an increase of 2 persons for every 100 persons in the base population. This is referred to as the annual growth rate.
It is a critical distinction for understanding demographics. Absolute numbers represent the raw head count. You count the physical bodies added to the total. The annual growth rate, however, is a percentage.
The text gives a super clear definition. A 2% rate per annum means that for every 100 people already existing in the population, 2 new people are added over the course of a year. Now, here's where the text introduces a mathematical paradox that I really want to unpack. Let me read the rest of this section. India's population has been steadily increasing from 361 million in 1951 to 1,210 million in 2011. Tables 6.1 and figures 6.4a and 6.4b reveal that from 1951 to 1981, the annual rate of population growth was steadily increasing, which explains the rapid increase in population from 361 million in 1951 to 683 million in 1981.
So the rate is going up and the numbers are going up.
Right, but listen to this next part. Since 1981, however, the rate of growth started declining gradually. During this period, birth rates declined rapidly. Still, 182 million people were added to the total population in the 1990s alone, an annual addition larger than ever before.
Okay, let's pause there. That sounds like a demographic victory at first, right? The growth rate is slowing down.
Right, but look at the very next piece of data the text provides. It says that despite the rate declining, 182 million people were added in the 90s, an annual addition larger than ever before. Wait, if the rate is declining, how is the absolute number of actual human beings being added to the country higher than it has ever been?
This isn't a contradiction. Actually, it is a demonstration of the power of a massive base number.
How so?
Well, the text spells out the mechanism explicitly in the next lines.
Let me read them. It is essential to realize that India has a very large population. When a low annual rate is applied to a very large population, it yields a large absolute increase. When more than a billion people increase even at a lower rate, the total number being added becomes very large. India's annual increase in population is large enough to neutralize efforts to conserve the resource endowment and environment.
So it's essentially the biological equivalent of compound interest.
Oh, I see. If you have a small savings account, say $1,000, and you earn a massive 10% interest rate, you only make $100. But if you have a massive account of $10 million and your interest rate plummets to a mere 2%, that seemingly tiny rate still generates $200,000.
Precisely. In demographics, when your base population crosses the billion-person mark, even a significantly lower percentage rate generates an ocean of new humanity. 1% of a billion is still 10 million new people every single year.
So the rate of the engine has slowed down, but the vehicle is so massive that it is still covering an astonishing amount of ground.
And the text doesn't shy away from the consequences of that momentum. It states that this massive annual absolute increase is large enough to neutralize efforts to conserve the resource endowment and environment.
No matter how efficiently a government tries to manage its forests, its water tables, or its agricultural output, simply adding tens of millions of new consumers every decade constantly threatens to outpace those conservation efforts.
Which forces us to look closer at what is actually driving that dynamic change. The text established that growth is slowing down, but numbers are still rising. But we need to understand the physical mechanisms behind those shifts.
The researchers identify three primary gears turning inside this demographic engine. Let's read the section detailing these processes of change. The declining trend of the growth rate is indeed a positive indicator of the efforts of birth control. Despite that, the total additions to the population base continue to grow, and India. Processes of population change growth. There are three main processes of change of population: birth rates, death rates, and migration.
Those are the three gears.
Let me read how they define the first two. The natural increase of population is the difference between birth rates and death rates. Birth rate is the number of live births per 1,000 persons in a year. It is a major component of growth because in India, birth rates have always been higher than death rates. Death rate is the number of deaths per 1,000 persons in a year. The main cause of the rate of growth of the Indian population has been the rapid decline in death rates.
The first two processes detailed here, birth rates and death rates, provide a classic study in historical demography. A population's natural increase is simply the math of who is arriving versus who is leaving.
What stands out to me is the historical sequence the text outlines. The massive population boom wasn't initially caused by a sudden drastic spike in people having more children.
No, not at all.
The text explicitly states that the main cause of rapid growth initially was the rapid decline in death rates.
This is a phenomenon we see globally as societies develop. Medical technology, access to antibiotics, improved sanitation, and more reliable agricultural yields all hit a society, and suddenly the mortality rate plummets. People stop dying from preventable diseases, and life expectancy shoots up.
If you think about it like water flowing into a bathtub, the birth rate is the faucet pouring water in, and the death rate is the drain letting water out.
That's a great visual.
For a long time, both the faucet and the drain were wide open. But with modern medicine and better food distribution, society effectively plugged the drain. Fewer people were leaving the system. But let me read the next part of the text because it explains the faucet. Till 1980, high birth rates and declining death rates led to a large difference between birth rates and death rates, resulting in higher rates of population growth. Since 1981, birth rates have also started declining gradually, resulting in a gradual decline in the rate of population growth. What are the reasons for this trend?
Right, so until 1980, the birth rate the faucet stayed wide open. That massive imbalance is what caused the immense rapid filling of the population tub.
It wasn't until after 1981 that the birth rate finally began to gradually decline, slowing the overall flow.
But as those first two processes dictate the overall size of the population, the third process dictates its shape and location: migration.
Yes, let's read about that third component. The third component of population growth is migration. Migration is the movement of people across regions and territories. Migration can be internal, within the country, or international, between the countries. Internal migration does not change the size of the population, but influences the distribution of population within the nation.
The text highlights internal migration, specifically the monumental shift of human beings from rural environments into urban centers.
Let me continue with the text. Migration plays a very significant role in changing the composition and distribution of population. In India, most migrations have been from rural to urban areas because of the push factor in rural areas. These are adverse conditions of poverty and unemployment in the rural areas and the pull of the city in terms of increased employment opportunities and better living conditions.
The concepts used to explain this are highly evocative push and pull factors. These aren't just academic terms. They describe the raw economic and social realities facing millions of people.
Exactly. The text defines push factors as the adverse conditions that literally force someone to leave their ancestral home. Poverty, a lack of arable land, unemployment. If the rural geography can no longer sustain your family, you are pushed out. You have no choice but to move.
And on the other end of that journey are the pull factors, the magnetic draw of the city. The text mentions increased employment opportunities and better living conditions. The city represents the possibility of social mobility, access to better hospitals, and more diverse industries.
And the data the authors use to illustrate this migration reveals one of the most significant sociological shifts in human history. We are looking at a society transforming its fundamental structure.
Yeah, let's hear the rest of that section.
Migration is an important determinant of population change. It changes not only the population size, but also the population composition of urban and rural populations in terms of age and sex composition. In India, the rural-urban migration has resulted in a steady increase in the percentage of population in cities and towns. The urban population has increased from 17.29% of the total population in 1951 to 31.80% in 2011. There has been a significant increase in the number of million-plus cities, from 35 to 53 in just one decade, i.e. 2001 to 2011. In 2023, there were 59 million-plus cities in India.
The numbers are just incredible. In 1951, only 17.29% of India's population lived in urban areas. The vast, overwhelming majority of the country was agrarian.
But by 2011, that urban figure had nearly doubled to almost 32%.
That percentage shift represents hundreds of millions of people packing up their lives and moving into cities. It creates an incredible strain on urban infrastructure, which is reflected in the final statistic of that section.
The rise of the million-plus cities. A city with over 1 million inhabitants is a complex organism requiring massive logistical support: water, sanitation, electricity, transit.
And the text notes that between just 2001 and 2011, the number of these megacities jumped from 35 to 53, and by 2023, it reached 59.
We are watching the urbanization of a continent-sized nation unfold in real time.
And as we look at these massive urban centers, we have to ask, who exactly makes up this population? Demographics aren't just about where people are, they're about who those people are at a biological level. The authors turn their focus to a specific, critical subset of the population next.
This brings us to a section that shifts the tone from infrastructural mechanics to profound human vulnerability. Let's read what the text says about the adolescent population. Adolescent population. The most significant feature of the Indian population is the size of its adolescent population. It constitutes 1/5 of the total population of India. Adolescents are generally grouped in the age group of 10 to 19 years. They are the most important resource for the future.
The text calls this demographic cohort the most significant feature of the Indian population. We are talking about individuals between the ages of 10 and 19.
And they constitute 1/5 of the entire nation. Think about the scale of that. 1/5 of over 1 billion people. You are looking at hundreds of millions of teenagers.
It's massive.
As the text rightly points out, This group is the single most important resource for the future of the country. This is the demographic dividend. If this massive wave of youth enters adulthood healthy, educated, and ready to work, the economic potential is virtually limitless.
They will be the inventors, the builders, the tax base, and the leaders of the next several decades. However, the authors immediately juxtapose that massive potential with the stark biological reality.
All right, let me read the rest of the paragraph. Nutrition requirements of adolescents are higher than those of a normal child or adult. Poor nutrition can lead to deficiency and stunted growth. But in India, the diet available to adolescents is inadequate in all nutrients. A large number of adolescent girls suffer from anemia. Their problems have so far not received adequate attention in the process of development. The adolescent girls have to be sensitized to the problems they confront. Awareness among them can be improved through the spread of literacy and education.
Adolescence is a period of intense physical development. The human body requires more calories, more protein, and more micronutrients during this phase than it does during childhood or full adulthood.
And the text is incredibly clear-eyed about the failures in meeting those needs. It plainly states that the diet available to adolescents is inadequate in all nutrients.
It specifically highlights the severe consequences: deficiency, stunted growth, and a high prevalence of anemia, particularly among adolescent girls.
Anemia is a lack of healthy red blood cells, right?
Yes, to carry adequate oxygen to the body's tissues. And it directly impacts cognitive development, physical stamina, and future maternal health. If a large percentage of your future workforce and future mothers are physically compromised by poor nutrition, the entire societal engine we've been discussing operates at a deficit.
But what I find fascinating is the solution the authors propose. They don't just say, we need to distribute more food. They approach it from a systemic demographic angle. The text emphasizes that these adolescent girls must be sensitized to the problems they confront.
Sensitization in this context means empowerment through knowledge.
Exactly. The text concludes that awareness can be improved through the spread of literacy and education. If you educate a young demographic about their own biological needs, about hygiene, about the importance of varied diets, they become advocates for their own health.
Literacy is the mechanism that breaks the cycle of nutritional ignorance. Education is quite literally a form of preventative healthcare.
And this recognition that education, health, and population dynamics are all intrinsically linked is the exact foundation of government policy regarding demographics.
Which flows perfectly into the next section of our source document. Governments do not just observe these statistics, they attempt to steer them.
Right. Let's look at how India formalized its approach to these massive demographic challenges. The text reads, National Population Policy. Recognizing that the planning of families would improve individual health and welfare, the government of India initiated a comprehensive family planning program in 1952. The Family Welfare Program has sought to promote responsible and planned parenthood on a voluntary basis.
There is a significant piece of historical context buried in the first sentence of that paragraph. The text notes that India initiated its comprehensive family planning program in 1952.
1952, that's really early.
On a global scale, it is remarkably early. India was one of the first countries in the world to officially recognize on a national governmental level that population growth required structured systemic planning.
The text then jumps forward. It says, the National Population Policy, NPP 2000, is a culmination of years of planned efforts. The NPP 2000 provides a policy framework for imparting free and compulsory school education up to 14 years of age, reducing infant mortality rate to below 30 per 1,000 live births, achieving universal immunization of children against all vaccine-preventable diseases, promoting delayed marriage for girls, and making family welfare a people-centered program.
So they describe the National Population Policy of 2000 as a culmination of those decades of effort. It represents the climax, the synthesized strategy resulting from years of trial and error.
And what is most revealing is how the policy is structured. It is not a singular mandate to simply lower the birth rate. It is a multifaceted framework that addresses the root causes of rapid population growth.
Let's examine the specific pillars of that framework because they directly connect to everything we've discussed so far. The first pillar is imparting free and compulsory school education up to 14 years of age.
This ties right back to our discussion on adolescence. Demographers know that keeping children, especially girls, in school longer is one of the most effective ways to organically lower birth rates and improve societal health.
Exactly. Education delays the onset of childbearing and increases economic opportunity. The second pillar targets the death rate side of the equation, reducing the infant mortality rate to below 30 per 1,000 live births.
Alongside the third pillar, which is achieving universal immunization against vaccine-preventable diseases.
This might seem counterintuitive at first glance. If you want to slow down population growth, why is saving more infants a core strategy?
That's a really good question.
Demographic history proves that when parents are confident that their children will survive infancy due to good health care and vaccines, they naturally choose to have fewer children overall. High infant mortality drives high birth rates as families compensate for the tragic expected loss of children. Lowering infant mortality is a prerequisite for stabilizing population growth.
That makes total sense. The fourth pillar is promoting delayed marriage for girls. Again, this directly addresses the anemia, stunting, and maternal health crises mentioned in the previous section. Delaying marriage allows the adolescent body to fully mature and allows the individual to gain further education.
And the final pillar acts as the guiding philosophy for the entire endeavor, making family welfare a people-centered program based on a voluntary basis.
Right. It rejects coercion in favor of empowerment. Provide the education, provide the health care, provide the vaccines, and trust that an informed, healthy population will naturally make demographic choices that benefit both their families and the nation's resource base.
It is a truly holistic approach to managing the dynamic engine of the population.
This brings us to a really fascinating part of the document. We have reached the end of chapter review questions. Now, our strict rule for this deep dive is that we cannot skip any part of the source material. So, rather than treating this as a mundane test, we're going to use these questions to see exactly what the authors of this text want the reader to retain.
I like that approach. Let's analyze the exam.
Let's start with the multiple choice section. Question 1, part Roman numeral 1. Choose the right answer from the 4 alternatives given below. I. Migrations change the number, distribution, and composition of the population in A. The area of departure, B. The area of arrival, C. Both the area of departure and arrival, D. None of the above.
The authors are testing the concept of push and pull factors here. The correct answer is C, both the area of departure and arrival.
And if we think back to our urbanization discussion, this makes perfect sense. When a young workforce leaves a rural village due to poverty, the push factor that village's population doesn't just shrink in absolute numbers, its composition changes. The village is left with an older demographic, perhaps more dependents.
Meanwhile, the city they arrive in, drawn by pull factors, experiences a surge in young, working-age individuals. The migration alters the demographic reality on both ends of the journey simultaneously.
Exactly. Look at the next one. Question 1, part Roman numeral 2. A large proportion of children in a population is a result of A. High birth rates, B. High life expectancies, C. High death rates, D. More married couples.
This is targeting the bathtub analogy we used earlier. The answer is A, high birth rates. A high life expectancy would result in a larger proportion of elderly individuals, not children.
A high proportion of children simply means the faucet is wide open. A high number of live births per 1,000 people is constantly replenishing the base of the population demographic. On to question 1, part Roman numeral 3. 3. The magnitude of population growth refers to A. The total population of an area, B. The number of persons added each year, C. The rate at which the population increases, D. The number of females per 1,000 males.
Here the authors want to ensure the reader understands the paradox we discussed about the 1981 data. The answer is B, the number of persons added each year.
Right. They are testing the difference between the percentage rate and the absolute magnitude. Option C is the rate, but the magnitude is the raw, physical reality of the increase. It's the 182 million actual people added in the 1990s, regardless of what the percentage rate was doing. It is the real-world scale of the growth.
Which leaves the final multiple-choice question.
Question 1, part Roman numeral 4. 4. According to the census, a literate person is one who A. Can read and write his or her name, B. Can read and write any language, C. Is 7 years old and can read and write any language with understanding, D. Knows the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic.
The correct answer here is C. A literate person is defined as someone who is 7 years old and can read and write any language with understanding.
This might be one of the most revealing details in the entire text. It shows the rigor behind the census data we discussed earlier. Literacy isn't defined by rote memorization. Just knowing how to draw the shapes of your own name doesn't count.
It requires a baseline age of cognitive development, 7 years old, and crucially, it requires understanding. This ensures that the demographic data regarding literacy reflect actual functional ability in society, which, as we saw with the adolescent health crisis, is the prerequisite for improving national welfare.
The text then moves to short answer questions, which require a synthesis of the chapter's broader themes. Let's tackle these. Section 2. Answer the following questions briefly. I'll read the prompt, and let's dissect the core concepts the authors are fishing for. I. Why is the rate of population growth in India declining since 1981?
This requires recalling the timeline of the processes of change. The death rate had already plummeted in the decades prior due to better healthcare and food security. But it wasn't until around 1981 that the birth rate driven by family planning initiatives, increased education, and shifting socioeconomic factors finally began a gradual decline of its own.
So the gap between births and deaths began to narrow, slowing the percentage rate of growth.
Exactly.
Next question. 2. Discuss the major components of population growth.
Again, reinforcing the mechanics. The components are birth rates, death rates, and migration. It is the interplay of natural biological increase combined with the physical movement of people seeking better opportunities.
All right. Question 3. Define age structure, death rate, and birth rate.
Well, we've defined birth and death rates thoroughly, the live births or deaths per thousand individuals. But age structure is vital. It is the composition of the population broken down by age groups.
This is exactly what the authors highlighted, with the adolescent population making up 1/5 of the nation. Age structure tells a government whether they need to build more pediatric clinics and schools today or more geriatric care facilities and retirement infrastructure tomorrow.
Let's look at the next prompt.
Question 4. How is migration a determinant factor of population change?
The authors are hammering this point home because internal migration is reshaping the continent. It is a determinant factor because it fundamentally redistributes the density.
It takes the pressure off rural agricultural land, the push factors, and concentrates that human capital into urban centers, the pull factors, creating the massive million-plus cities that drive modern economic development.
Right.
Okay, question 3. Distinguish between population growth and population change.
Growth is merely a metric of scale. It is the absolute increase in numbers. Change, however, is the comprehensive, dynamic evolution of the population. Change encompasses growth, but it also includes the urbanization caused by migration, shifts in the age structure, and improvements in literacy and health.
Awesome. Question 4. What is the relation between occupational structure and development? Now, our specific excerpt didn't focus heavily on occupational structure, but extrapolating from the text logic, development requires a shift from purely agrarian rural labor into diverse, specialized urban occupations.
Yeah, as migration pulls people into cities, the occupational structure shifts toward industry and services, which drives national economic development.
Moving to question 5. What are the advantages of having a healthy population?
This goes right back to the opening philosophical paragraph. Humans are the central pivot. We make resources. Therefore, a healthy population free from the anemia and stunting mentioned in the adolescent section is an energetic, capable, and productive workforce. Health is the prerequisite for innovation and economic stability.
And the final short answer, question 6. What are the significant features of the National Population Policy 2000?
The authors want the reader to remember that it is a holistic, voluntary framework. It isn't just about birth control, it is about free education up to age 14, universal immunization, reducing infant mortality below 30 per 1,000, and delaying marriage. It is a policy built on the idea that social welfare dictates demographic outcomes.
There is one final piece to this review section that I find incredibly insightful as an educational tool. Let me read the project prompt provided at the end. Project activity. Conduct a class census by preparing a questionnaire. The questionnaire should contain minimum 5 questions. Questions should relate to students, their family members, their class performance, their health, etc. Each student is required to fill in the questionnaire, compile the information in numerical.
And the text fades out there, but the intent is brilliant.
It really is. The authors are asking the reader to stop looking at demographics as an abstract science practiced by bureaucrats in a capital city. By conducting a class census, you realize that demographic data starts in your own classroom, your own home.
Asking 30 students about their health, their family size, and their performance teaches you the exact same mechanics of enumeration and data compilation that the government uses to understand 1.2 billion people. The mechanics are identical, only the scale changes.
It completely demystifies the entire process. It grounds the abstract numbers in immediate personal reality.
Which brings us to the final, massive section of our source document. To truly understand a geographical text, you have to master the language it uses to describe both the human beings and the physical stage they live on.
The glossary, Part 10. The source material ends with a comprehensive glossary of geographical terms, and per our strict rules, we are not skipping a single word. We are going to examine every term sequentially.
But we aren't just going to read them like a dictionary. We are going to look at how these definitions interlock to build the reality of the Indian subcontinent. Let's start with the demographic and human-centric terms.
Sounds good. Birth rate death? The number of live births for every 1,000 persons in a year? Death rate death? The number of deaths per 1,000 persons in a year? Density of population state? The average number of persons per unit area, such as a square kilometer? Growth rate of population. The growth rate of population indicates the rate at which the population is growing. In estimating the growth rate, the increase in population is compared to the base population. It can be measured annually or over a decade.
We've dissected these first four terms extensively. They form the foundational mathematics of demography. The faucet of births, the drain of deaths, the physical crowding of density, and the compound interest of the growth rate. But the glossary introduces some new, highly specific demographic metrics right after this.
Exactly. Let's read the next few. Dependency ratio. The ratio of people of dependent age, below 15 and above 60 years, to people of economically active ages, 15 to 59 years. Life expectancy gap, the average number of years one is expected to live. Sex ratio. Sex ratio is defined as the number of females per 1,000 males. Migration. Movement of people from one place to another. Internal migration means movement of people within a country, and external migration means movement of people between countries. When people come to a country from another country, it is called immigration, and when they leave that country, it is called emigration. Million-plus cities. Cities with a population of more than 1 million or 10 lakh.
Let's unpack the dependency ratio. This is an incredibly powerful economic concept. Imagine a seesaw. On one side, you have the economically active population, people between 15 and 59, who are working, earning wages, and paying taxes.
And on the other side of the seesaw are the dependents' children under 15 who need schooling and care, and the elderly over 60 who require pensions and increased medical support.
Right. If the birth rate is very high or if life expectancy shoots up dramatically, the dependent side of the seesaw gets very heavy. It puts immense economic pressure on the working age population to generate enough surplus wealth to support everyone else.
When we talked about the adolescent population being a future resource, we were talking about shifting that seesaw. As those teenagers enter the 15 to 59 bracket, the working side of the seesaw becomes heavier, creating a massive opportunity for economic growth.
And the sex ratio definition, the number of females per 1,000 males, is another diagnostic tool.
Yeah.
In a perfectly balanced biological scenario, this number should be roughly even.
When a census reveals a heavily skewed sex ratio, it alerts sociologists and government planners to deeper cultural, medical, or systemic issues regarding gender equality, maternal mortality, or targeted gender biases that need to be addressed.
And we see the culmination of migration and shifting economics in the million-plus cities. The 10 lakh, which is the Indian numbering system term for 1 million. These aren't just large towns, they are the dense gravitational centers of the nation's economy.
But all of this human activity, these massive cities, these dense populations, must exist within a physical space. The rest of the glossary shifts from the human metrics to the physical stage the humans are standing on. Let's look at how the authors define this environment.
Okay, let's hear the environmental terms.
Ecosystem, a system which comprises the physical environment and the organisms living therein. Environment frames, surroundings or the conditions under which a person or thing exists and develops his or its character. It covers both physical and cultural elements. Fauna, the animal life of a given area. Flora, the total vegetation or plant cover of a region. Lake, a body of water that lies in a hollow in the Earth's surface and is entirely surrounded by land. Lagoon, a saltwater lake separated from the sea by the sandbars and spits. Monsoon, a complete reversal of winds over a large area leading to a change of seasons.
These terms describe the resources and the limitations of the physical world. Flora and fauna, the plants and animals, are the biological baseline. An ecosystem is the interactive neighborhood where the physical landscape meets that biology.
I find the distinction in the definition of environment fascinating. It explicitly covers both physical and cultural elements. This loops right back to the opening paragraph of the text.
Also,
Your environment isn't just the dirt and the trees. It is the laws, the language, the societal norms, and the demographic pressures surrounding you.
oh, absolutely. And terms like lake, lagoon, and especially monsoon dictate where that density we talked about can actually occur. A lagoon offers protected coastal waters for fishing and settlement, but the monsoon is perhaps the most critical physical mechanism for the subcontinent.
People often use the word monsoon casually to just mean a heavy rainstorm, but the geographical definition is much more profound. A complete reversal of winds over a large area.
It is a massive seasonal atmospheric engine. During the summer, the wind patterns physically flip, dragging unimaginable amounts of moisture from the Indian Ocean and dumping it across the landmass.
This wind reversal is the lifeblood of the high-density agricultural areas we discussed earlier. Without the monsoon, you cannot support 1 billion people.
But why does the subcontinent have this unique weather pattern, and why does it have the high mountains and flat plains that dictate its density? The final group of glossary terms answers this by looking deep underground into the geological violence that literally built the country.
Let's read these geological terms. This is the structural blueprint of the land. Lithospheric plates, large segments of the Earth's crust, composed of continental and oceanic lithospheric parts, floating above the asthenosphere. Tectonic forces originating within the Earth and responsible for bringing widespread changes in the landform features. Fault, a linear break in rocks of the Earth's crust, along which there has been displacement in a horizontal, vertical, or oblique direction. Fold, a bend in the rock strata resulting from compression of an area of the Earth's crust. Geosyncline, a narrow, shallow, elongated basin with a sinking bottom in which a considerable thickness of sediments was deposited by the rivers coming from Angara and Gondwanaland. Mountain, an upward projected features of the Earth's surface that rises to high altitude and usually possesses steep slopes. Young Mountain, the fold mountains formed during the most recent major phase of folding in the Earth's crust. Subcontinent, a big landmass which stands out as a distinct geographical unit from the rest of the continent.
This sequence of definitions tells a spectacular geological story. The outer shell of the Earth isn't solid. It is cracked into massive puzzle pieces called lithospheric plates. And deep inside the Earth, intense heat and pressure tectonic forces act as an engine that pushes these massive plates around.
And when these giant puzzle pieces crash into each other, the rock has to go somewhere. The text defines a fault as a break or a snap in the rock where things slide past each other, which causes earthquakes.
But a fold is different. A fold is a bend caused by compression. If you lay a thick rug on a slippery floor and push the two ends toward the middle, the center of the rug buckles and folds upward into ridges.
That is exactly how the Himalayas were created. The Indian lithospheric plate crashed into the Eurasian plate. The immense tectonic compression caused the Earth's crust to fold upward, creating the highest upward projected features on the planet, the mountains.
And because this geological collision happened relatively recently in Earth's history, they are classified as young mountains. They're still jagged, still rising, and haven't been worn smooth by hundreds of millions of years of erosion.
This crash also explains the geosyncline. As those mountains pushed upward, a massive sinking trench, a basin, formed at their base. Over millions of years, rivers flowing out of the ancient land masses dumped unfathomable amounts of mud, silt, and sediment into this sinking bathtub.
This geosyncline eventually filled up to become the vast, flat, incredibly fertile northern plains.
Which brings us full circle. Those flat plains, filled with deep sediment and watered by the monsoon, are the exact geographic features that allow for the high agricultural yields, which in turn support the massive population density of states like Uttar Pradesh and Bihar.
The tectonic collision created the plains created the food, and the food supports the billion people. It is an unbroken chain of cause and effect.
And the sheer scale of the Himalayas, those young fold mountains acting as a massive physical wall, is what makes India a subcontinent. It is attached to Asia, but the mountains isolated into its own distinct, self-contained geographical, meteorological, and cultural universe.
There are just a few remaining terms that describe the specific materials found within this landscape and how humans measure their place upon it.
Let's finish the glossary. Sedimentary rocks. Rocks composed of sediments and generally having a layered structure. Metamorphic rocks. Deformation and alteration of pre-existing igneous and sedimentary rocks as a result of changes in physical and chemical conditions due to intense heat or pressure. Depression. In meteorology, it denotes an area of relatively low atmospheric pressure, which is found mainly in temperate regions. In geology, it refers to a hollow sunken area of the Earth's surface. Glacier, a mass of snow and ice that moves slowly under the influence of gravity along a confined course away from its place of accumulation. Local time, The time of a place determined by the midday sun is called the local time.
The rock types here show the physical history of the land. Sedimentary rocks are exactly what filled that geosyncline layers of mud and sand compressed over time.
But if those rocks get pushed deep underground during a tectonic collision, the extreme heat and pressure warp and bake them into something entirely new, harder, and chemically altered. That is a metamorphic rock. It has literally morphed its form.
The term depression is interesting because the authors provide two different disciplinary definitions. In meteorology, it is a weather system, an area of low pressure that usually brings storms and rain. But in geology, it is simply a physical dent in the earth, a sunken hollow that might eventually become a lake.
And high above those lakes, up in the Jungfold Mountains, you have the glaciers. These are essentially rivers of solid ice. They accumulate massive amounts of snow, compact into ice, and then gravity relentlessly pulls them down the mountainside, carving the rock as they move.
The melting of these glaciers is what feeds the rivers that flow down into the plains, sustaining the agriculture below.
Which leaves us with the final term, local time.
Well,
It seems almost out of place among all these geological and demographic heavyweights, but it represents how humans orient themselves in the physical world.
before global standardized time zones, every single village or town set its clocks to noon at the exact moment the sun reached its highest point in the sky, directly over their specific location. Time was entirely dictated by your immediate physical geography.
It is a fitting final term. It reminds us that our experience of reality, even something as abstract as time, is fundamentally anchored to the physical world we inhabit. And, well, we did it. We have systematically unpacked every single paragraph, every statistic, every review question, and every glossary term of this foundational document.
Yeah, we covered it all.
To you, our listener, I want to sincerely congratulate you for staying with us through this deeply detailed exploration. We didn't just skim the surface today.
No, we looked at the structural blueprints. We moved from the philosophical idea that humans are the alchemy that creates resources through the sheer logistical marvel of counting 1.2 billion people down into the mechanics of rural to urban migration, the critical health needs of an adolescent generation, and finally into the tectonic violence that built the stage for all of this to happen.
We have seen that demographics aren't just dry numbers sitting in a government archive. They are the living, breathing, dynamic engine of human potential. Which brings us to the end of today's deep dive. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
I keep returning to that opening assertion in the text, the idea that coal was completely meaningless, just a dense rock until the human population grew, and human technology advanced enough to recognize its potential. Human ingenuity dictates what is valuable.
So my provocative thought for you to explore is this. As our massive global population continues to expand, and as our technological capabilities accelerate at an unprecedented rate, what completely useless rocks or ignored elements in your environment right now will undergo that same alchemy. What abundant, seemingly worthless material that you walk past every single day without a second thought might suddenly become the most fiercely sought-after, highly valued resource of the 22nd century.
It is an incredible question. It reminds us that the environment is only static until human population and innovation force it to change.
Thank you so much for joining us on this extensive journey through the numbers, the geography, and the human realities of the subcontinent. Keep examining the world around you, keep asking why things are the way they are, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.